Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the release of the ASER 2020 Wave 1 report. As you all will appreciate, this year's ASER is a completely different experience for almost every possible reason. We have all been through the ASER journey this year from the comfort of our homes. We have spoken to families and children who have been going through this very strange time during this extremely unreal experience that we are all going through in this pandemic. And we are all here for the first time virtually to hear about the findings of ASER, the first ASER virtual release. Many of you have in the past been joining our live streams virtually as well, and we're excited to have so many of you with us here today. Hopefully you are able to see and hear us well. If you have any technical challenges throughout the event, please do mention in the chat and we will try to address them. My name is Devyani Prasad and I will be your host for today. Without any further ado, I'd like to begin the event by giving a small glimpse into what the ASER experience has been like this year. As I mentioned, and you will appreciate, it's been a very different experience for Pratham teams, for ASER teams, and teams all over the country. So here we go. Hope you enjoy the ASER experience.
रोजाना की तरह 18 सितंबर को भी मैं असर सर्वे के लिए अलग अलग घरों में कॉल लगा रही थी। तो मैंने गुलाबगढ़ गांव के एक घर में कॉल लगाई। तो जैसे ही उन्होंने कॉल रिसीव की तो उधर से आवाज़ आई, हेलो बबली मैम, कैसे हो आप वही मैम हो ना जो असर सर्वे के लिए हमारे गांव में आए थे। तो मुझे काफ़ी खुशी हुई। खुशी इस बात की नहीं कि उन्हें मेरा नाम और नंबर याद था, बल्कि इस बात की कि 2 साल बाद भी वो असर को नहीं भूले थे।
सपनों की साइकिल उड़ते चलेंगे आज पेडलों को मार कर हम कुछ किसी पीठ पे पहाड़ जैसे बैग है, कंधों से आज उन्हें चलेंगे उतार कर
फ़ोन करने के दौरान मुझे कुछ उत्तरदाताओं से या कुछ घरों से यह सुनने को मिला कि फ़ोन तो बहुत सारे आते हैं, लेकिन एक आप ही हैं जो बच्चों की पढ़ाई लिखाई से संबंधित या बच्चों की शिक्षा से संबंधित बात कर रहे हैं।
टीचर माने सेते बेले नूतन वर्ष पे केमती पिला माने नाम लेखा हबो सेति प्राय स्कूल जाउछंती, घर घर बुली सामाजिक दूरता अवलंबन करी बापा मान को बुझेई पिला मान को नाम लेखा इन्श्योर करछंती।
Most of the children come from different tribal areas. None of them have a TV or a mobile phone in their home. There are TVs in few places in their area. The children in each classes go to the places where a TV is available and sit there and attend the classes together.
सर्वे के दौरान बहुत से माता पिता बच्चों की पढ़ाई से संबंधित, बच्चों की पढ़ाई कैसे हो, मुझसे ये सवाल पूछने लगते थे और ऐसे कोरोना की स्थिति में क्या किया जाए। मैंने उन सभी अभिभावकों से, गांव के शिक्षकों से बात करने, बच्चों को ट्यूशन पढ़ाने, डीडी बिहार चैनल पर प्रसारित मेरा दूरदर्शन मेरा विद्यालय एवं घर के बड़े बच्चों की सहायता से छोटे बच्चों को पढ़ाने के लिए सुझाव दिए। पूछ रही थी कि क्या आपके बच्चे वर्तमान में आंगनबाड़ी या पूर्व प्राथमिक विद्यालय में नामांकित हैं?
आसरच्या संबंधी मी जेव्हा सर्वे करण्यासाठी एका पालकांना फोन केला होता एका गावामध्ये, त्या पालकांनी मला सांगितलं की टिलीमिली प्रोग्राम हा त्यांना सरपंच जे आहे त्या गावाचे त्यांनी बघायला सांगितलं होतं. अशाप्रमाणे सगळ्याच मुलांना त्यांनी गावाच्या मुलांना सांगितले होते की टिलीमिली प्रोग्राम बघावं.
एक उत्तरदाता ने सर्वेक्षण में शामिल होने के लिए शर्त रखी, कुछ जीके के सवाल का जवाब दो और सर्वेक्षण कर लो, लेकिन जवाब देने के बावजूद वे अव्यस्त होने की बात बता दिए और कॉल काट दिए. यही प्रक्रिया 2 दिनों तक चलता रहा. दरअसल वो मुझ पर विश्वास नहीं कर पा रहे थे. कहते हैं उम्मीद पर दुनिया कायम है. यही एक उम्मीद से सर्वेक्षण के लिए मैं उन्हें लगातार कॉल करता रहा और मेरी कोशिश जारी रही. आखिर में तीसरे दिन कॉल उन्होंने उठाकर बोला, आप अपनी सर्वेक्षण पूरा कर लो.
This survey has left a deep impression on my mind because of the people and the stories. Has much to be prepared, not only myself, but to help people around me.
I'd now like to welcome Dr. Willima Vadva, Director of ASER Center, to share a few words. Welcome, Willima.
Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you, our good friends from here and abroad, our partners, volunteers, Pratham and ASER state teams. This has been such a bizarre year, and it feels so strange to be here welcoming you to the ASER 2020 release when I can't see you, and it's not January, when the ASER report is has been released for the last 15 years. So thank you so much for taking the time today to join us today for the ASER 2020 release. Like I said, it's been a strange year, but all of us have adapted, and so has ASER. And so here we are in October 2020 to share the results of this year's ASER with you. As you know, ASER has been providing comparable estimates of schooling and learning since 2005. We did ASER every year from 2005 to 14. And in 2016, we started a new cycle where the nationwide ASER is done every other year. So, and in the off years, we do ASER focusing on specific age groups. So this year, 2020, we were scheduled to do ASER in all rural districts of the country. And, but with the country shutting down in March of this year and the pandemic raging across the world, it became clear quite early on that we would not be able to do ASER in the field, especially not with 30,000 volunteers. But given that school closures started as early as March 2020 and schools are yet to reopen, in many ways, it was also clear that it was even more important to do an ASER this year to gauge the impact that the pandemic had had on children's schooling and learning. According to UNESCO, in the beginning of April, schools had closed across 194 countries, affecting 1.6 billion learners, 91% of all children enrolled in school in the world. Not only was the pandemic expected to affect learning levels adversely, with family budgets getting squeezed, it might also result in higher dropout rates. Further, depending on what happens when schools open, the impact of the pandemic will be felt on different aspects of education at different times. And finally, and most importantly, across sectors, the adverse impact of the pandemic has been felt on already vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. In education too, equity gaps might increase based on unequal access to different forms of technology-based educational inputs. Therefore, ASER 2020 is designed to be conducted in multiple waves to measure the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic at different times. The first wave, conducted in September of this year, focuses on children's access to learning materials during the period when schools are still closed. Um, During this period, state governments as well as private schools have been sending a variety of learning materials through different means. And while we have a fair amount of information on the content and how the material was shared, very little is known on whether children received this material and how they engaged with it. And this is what ASER 2020 focuses on, because moving forward, it becomes critical to understand what worked and for whom. Where were the gaps in accessing materials, and did different actors step up to support children, and whether this can be leveraged in the future? An important decision that we had to make was how to do the survey when movement was still restricted. And the obvious answer was to do a phone survey. And here is where we got a little lucky, because one of the main problems of phone surveys is often the unavailability of a representative and reliable frame to sample from. Now, we routinely collect phone numbers of households when we do ASER for recheck and monitoring reasons. And because ASER is representative at the district level, it has a fairly large sample as compared to other similar surveys. And also, because mobile coverage is 90%, this meant that we could use the ASER 2018 sample to draw the 2020 sample. So today we are going to present results from the ASER 2020 Wave 1 that focuses on the period when schools are still closed and on children's access to learning materials. This was conducted in September of this year. Wave 1 of ASER 2020 focuses on 4 domains. Enrollment. What is the enrollment status of children amid school closures? Have enrollment patterns changed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? Access and availability of learning materials. Do children have textbooks? Do they have access to a smartphone? What is their parents' education? Do their parents help them in studying at home? What about other family members? Do children get support from other family members in studying at home? Access and availability of learning materials. Did children receive learning materials and activities sent by schools? And if so, through what medium? And finally, learning engagement. What kinds of learning activities did children do during this period when the schools were closed? Did they use textbooks or worksheets? Did they watch or listen to an educational program on the television or the radio? Did they use online resources or participate in web classes? ASER 2020 was conducted in 584 districts across 30 states and union territories. Almost 120,000 households were called by 1,500 volunteers during a 10-day period, giving us a sample that is representative at the state level. Before I end, I want to thank everyone who was involved and supported this Herculean task during a period when we were all working remotely. ASER 2020 volunteers primarily came from within the Pratham family, and partners and volunteers from Tripura, Gujarat, Jammu and Kashmir, Manipur, Meghalaya, Nagaland, and Kerala. As an organization, everybody stepped up to the task. We had volunteers from every vertical, each and every vertical of our group. It didn't matter whether it was the Hamara Gaon team, or the learning camp team, or the early childhood team, or the MME team, or the vocational team, the science program team, or other content teams. Everyone participated, including the accounts team. Work stopped for 20 days while people attended a grueling 5-day remote training and then made hundreds and thousands of phone calls during a 2-week period. And of course, the ASER teams that held this all together, who learned all about phone service. This is our first phone survey in a record period of time. Piloted a brand new questionnaire during the lockdown, conducted trainings and monitoring remotely, and finally put together this report in less than a month. This coming together of people is the spirit of ASER, and ASER would not be possible without it. So a big thank you and congratulations to everyone who made ASER possible this year. And now let's look at some of the findings from the report. Thank you.
Between 2005 and 2014, ASER provided nationally representative estimates of schooling and learning every year. Since 2016, the major nationwide ASER has been conducted every alternate year, with the survey in gap years focused on a different aspect of schooling and learning. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted this 15-year tradition, but in the current scenario, it is essential to understand the impact of the pandemic on schooling and learning opportunities for children across India. ASER 2020 was therefore adapted to a phone survey format that could be conducted in multiple waves in order to capture the effects of the pandemic on different aspects of children's education. ASER 2020, the first phone survey in ASER history. The first wave of ASER 2020 was designed to explore the provision of and access to remote education mechanisms and modes in rural India. Carried out in September 2020, the ASER 2020 Wave 1 phone survey reached a nationally representative set of households and schools in 30 states and union territories. A sample of 52,227 households was surveyed, covering 59,251 children in the age group of 5 to 16. In addition, information was collected from about 9,000 schools. The 2020 Wave 1 survey collected information on 2018 data indicators such as school enrollment and smartphone access and additional information to understand the impact of the pandemic on children's learning opportunities. 2018 versus 2020. School enrollment patterns. How has school enrollment changed since 2018? National level data from ASER 2020 shows a small shift in the proportion of children, both boys and girls, attending government schools as compared to data from 2018. However, there is significant variation in patterns across states, with some states showing significant drops in private school enrollment and others where enrollment in private schools has shot up. Global estimates suggest that the consequences of the pandemic could include more children dropping out of school. While the true picture will only be known once schools reopen, ASER 2020 shows that among both boys and girls, increases in the proportion of children not enrolled are visible mostly among the youngest children, probably because families are waiting for schools to reopen to seek admission. Smartphone access has increased enormously in the last 2 years. While in 2018, 36.5% of those who had phones had smartphones, this figure stands at 61.8% in 2020. The percentage point increase is similar to households of children enrolled in government and private schools. During the pandemic, household resources to support learning. While schools are closed, children rely mainly on the resources available at home to help them learn. These resources could be family members, technology, or learning materials such as textbooks. ASER 2020 shows that whether acquired before or after school closures in March 2020, more than 80% children have textbooks for their current grade. This proportion is higher among students enrolled in government than in private schools. However, in some states, this figure is below 50%. Relatively few students in school today are first-generation schoolgoers, implying more opportunity for parental support. More than 3 out of 4 children have at least one parent who has completed primary school, and more than a quarter have both parents who have studied beyond class 9. Learning support by family members. ASER 2020 data shows that regardless of parents' education level, families are investing significant effort in supporting children's learning. About 75% children get some kind of help in studying at home from different family members, depending on the grade level of the child. For example, older siblings help more in higher grades and mothers help more in lower grades. Even among families where both parents have little or no schooling themselves, more than half of all children receive help at home from family members. In addition, about 30% children take paid private tuition, access to learning materials and activities. Governments and others have used a variety of mechanisms to share diverse learning materials with students during school closures. ASER 2020 asked whether households had accessed or received any such materials from children's schools in the week prior to the survey in September 2020. Overall, about 1/3 of enrolled children had received some form of learning materials or activities other than textbooks from their teachers during the week preceding the survey. This figure, however, varies immensely across the country, with more than 85% children having received such activities in some states. This proportion was higher in higher grades than in lower ones, and higher among students in private schools than in government schools. Regardless of school type, WhatsApp was the most common medium through which activities and materials were received. However, this proportion was much higher among children in private schools than those in government schools. On the other hand, children in government schools were much more likely to have received materials through personal contact with a teacher than those in private schools, either when the teacher visited the household or else when a household member visited the school. Among the roughly 2/3 of all households that reported not having received learning materials during the reference week, the majority said that the schools had not sent any materials. Overall, 70% households reported that children did some learning activity in the reference week. In both government and private schools, traditional teaching materials like textbooks and workbooks were used the most. Online resources were used more by private school children. In addition to the household sample, ASER 2020 received responses from about 9,000 schools. 50% teachers reported that they had received some training to conduct remote teaching and learning activities. And about 2/3 of the school respondents reported that they had shared learning materials in the reference week. Most interestingly, across the country, 70% schools responded that they had reached out to the community to get help in reaching children. They reported receiving help from a variety of sources, including village heads, Anganwadi workers, NGOs, and others. Families reported that about 1/3 of all children's teachers had been in touch with households in the reference week. However, more educated parents have more contact with the school. Thoughts for Way Forward. ASER Wave 1 survey helped understand variations in schooling status between 2018 and 2020 and provided a glimpse into the inputs and activities children were exposed to during school closures. Areas that need attention, such as potential learning loss, especially for children with low engagement with activities and weak home support, would need to be emphasized as systems begin to re-engage children in learning. When schools reopen, it will be important to continue to monitor who goes back to school, as well as to understand whether there is learning loss as compared to the previous year. Parents' increasing levels of education can be integrated into planning for learning improvement of children, as advocated by NEP. Elder siblings can also play an important role. Children are doing a variety of different activities at home. Effective ways of hybrid learning need to be developed that combine these with traditional teaching learning. An in-depth assessment of what works and how is needed to improve digital content and delivery for the future. Expectedly, children from families who had low education and also did not have resources like smartphones were more deprived of learning opportunities. But even among such households, there is evidence that family members and schools try to help. These children will need even more help than others when schools reopen.
I'd now like to welcome Dr. Madhav Chavan to moderate our first panel discussion for today. Our panel discussion will feature eminent panelists, including Mr. Ashish Dhawan from Central Square Foundation, Rohini Nilekani from Arghyam, Vineet Nair from Sampark Foundation, and as mentioned, will be moderated by Dr. Madhav Chavan. Over to you, Madhav. You're on mute, Madhav.
Okay. So welcome to my fellow panelists. As I've assured them, I'm going to say the least. They've just seen the findings of the survey, and maybe it's a bit too much to catch everything together. But as far as I can see, and I've seen the reports, basically what it seems like is that the country didn't, the education, so to say, the school stopped, but children seem to be doing something. But from the findings, it is clear that the poorest, the ones with the least number of smartphones or whatever, that category of children, government school children with poor access to digital technology are going to have a tough time, or are having a tough time. But all that I can keep saying, this reminds me somehow of 2005 when we did the first ASER survey. It was not clear what was going to emerge out of it. We were sort of wondering what is going to come out of the survey. And then when we finished the survey, we said, aha, so learning levels are a big problem. It's not like we knew that before. So with this survey also, I don't know what I was expecting, but that's the first question I'm going to toss at Rohini. I'm sure everybody's been watching the scenario, reading about things and so on. We are all sitting at home and then wondering what's going to happen to education. So from what you've seen in the survey results, what did you expect, and what surprised you in this survey, or what didn't surprise you? Rohini, it's you.
Thank you, Madhav. Namaste, everybody. I hope you're all safe wherever you are. First of all, I just want to say, Madhav, hearty congratulations to ASER once again, to the whole team for being, as usual, pioneering, as usual, innovative, and as usual, thorough in whatever is being done. So this survey was a surprise. I heard of it only recently. And it's a marvelous survey because for once, this is not about learning outcomes so much as the process of learning. And to me, hearing all of this sounds like the heartbeat of a nation desperate to keep its children learning at all costs. It's probably the sound of resilience, or what resilience probably looks like. And so I'm very excited because 2-3 things became very clear, just popped out at me. One is, of course, and the summary of the report was already covered all these points. But first of all, as you said, we as a nation have to take stock of the digital device and divide and do whatever we can to address it. I mean, there is absolutely no doubt about it. It has to be treated with the utmost urgency. And because this is not the first pandemic, nor will it be the last, or there may be other disruptions. So school may not be as stable as it has been for all these decades. So we have to do something for the children left behind, because it will always be a combination of physical and virtual. Number two, the best news is we always knew that education was too important to be left to educators alone. And this coming together of the samaj, right, starting from the house, the parents, the siblings, cousins who we don't know, and the community. 70% of the school said the community had come forward to help. I mean, this is fantastic news. All our school systems can get so much support. So it seems to me that definitely the aspiration for education is internalized. We knew that. This is demonstrating it. We have data for it. And now we can see that parents especially clearly have the will to help their children. Now we must, this is a fantastic opportunity to now also build their skills to engage with their children. And it's so doable because there's so many creative ways we could do that. The dream that we were all waiting for, Mother, 25 years of Pratham, etc., that we will have finally a generation of children who are not first generation school goers, right? Most of the children's parents have at least some education. And this is the moment we've been waiting for. This is the moment to capitalize on. So this is all the good news that I found from the survey. And last point, the digital age is here. It's no use being technophobic. We have to make technology work for us. We have to make technology work for children. We have to develop a digital pedagogy, which doesn't mean that children stick to screens all the time, but digital allows you to give access to any time, anywhere, just in time access to children who may be stuck for various reasons, like we saw in this pandemic. So it's a call to action to develop a digital pedagogy. And that's different from just the textbook being shown on the screen, because the light, just as the light bulb was different from 1,000 candles. I see many, many opportunities here. I find it exciting. Everything is not good news, but there's so much good news that we can unleash a lot of creativity. So those are my first thoughts.
Thank you. Ashish, it's your turn now. Rohini has focused on the community parental angle and all that, and has touched upon the challenges of the digital age. What are your thoughts?
So firstly, Madhav, I think whilst there's a lot of excitement around potential opportunities for the future, this is a terrible year for children in that most children are being left behind. They're going to lose the better part of the year. And we need to seriously think about, when we're going to open schools physically, because we cannot keep children away for too long. I find it kind of surprising that we don't have more of a debate in India around when schools ought to reopen and what the sequence ought to be, because most places in the world, actually primary schools are being prioritized in terms of reopening, as opposed to just looking at board exams and prioritizing secondary schools, because those kids can potentially learn on their own, etc. So that's number one. I think it's a very, very difficult situation, and we need to think about, how we create an accelerated learning program, remediate children as they get back to school, and when we reopen school. I think in terms of the findings of the survey, I think it's a mixed bag. The fact that only a third of children access some material other than the textbook in any given week, it just shows you that the digital divide is here to stay for a while, whilst smartphone penetration increase, but also the school systems are still not fully equipped to do this. I mean, we saw the variation between a Punjab and Kerala and a Bihar on the other hand, and some of the other states. And so many states are yet to get their act together. And I think we should use this moment to actually make that happen. Two is, I think we knew this, that WhatsApp is the medium. I mean, there are 400 million WhatsApp users in India, and we shouldn't look at penetration at an individual level, i.e. 400 million divided by 1.35 billion, but instead at the household level. And we know that household penetration of smartphones and WhatsApp is quite significant. So despite the fact that we need to take care of children who don't have access and need an omni-channel approach, I think WhatsApp first is what we need to look at. I think the other thing that's come out, which Rohini brought out, is that parents are finally engaged with their children to a much greater extent. All of us always focus on school effects and what we can do with school. And I know Pratham has done some work in the past, but very little work has been done in terms of household effects, which we know research shows are more important than school effects. And so how can parents be more engaged? How can we get children to do more stuff at home, whether it's reading or activities or worksheets, etc. So developing this home-based curriculum and getting parents more involved, I think is critical. What was surprising, I think, from the survey is that fathers are actually quite involved, maybe because they have access to the smartphone. But it was a positive surprise that fathers were as involved as mothers, and elder sibling was as involved as either of the parents. So that to me was a positive surprise, that we don't just need to reach out to the mothers, but the fathers are also an important constituent to look at. And I think going forward, coming out of this, there are some real opportunities. I do want to point to a couple of examples. One is, I think as far as teachers are concerned, smartphone penetration is almost ubiquitous across the country. We've seen examples like Teacher App, which is an organization which created 75 odd mini courses for teachers, and over 1 million teachers have taken 5+ courses now of the Teacher App, and many states are now embedding this. So I think there could be a blended way to do teacher professional development, to create professional learning communities, to make resources available to teachers. So I think that's one opportunity going forward. A second is this channel with the parents. Now that we have database of parents and many teachers are now connected with parents, how can we on an ongoing basis going forward keep parents engaged and involved, whether it's through text message, WhatsApp, IVRS, on an ongoing basis, and integrate technology into the teaching learning process, but also get parents more involved. And then in terms of Diksha or other platforms, I think we've seen a huge spurt recently, but also I think the fact that quality content is getting created or stimulated in the vernacular, because there's been a real need right now. So one example is a project we worked on with Google called Tic Tac Learn, and literally just started it, and now 7 million viewers per month on YouTube and 2 million on Diksha, very, very quickly. So I think there are some new possibilities coming out, but my bigger concern is just the fact that we have lost the better part of a year, and what do we do as children get back to school, and when will they get back to school? We need more of a conversation around that.
Let me come to Vineet. Vineet, you invested a lot of time, personal money, your big organization, Sampark Foundation, working on this. Yes, I certainly want to know what surprised you. 35% only out of the people who had smartphones seem to have got, those who had phones got the material. And it seems to me, just an observation, that what came through, what was really useful, was the long-term investment that has preceded the digital age, so to say. The fact that parents are educated is an investment from several decades. The fact that textbooks are available, I'm really happy that many governments actually send textbooks home. Parents, the teachers seem to have gone home and given textbooks. If all that has happened because of a strong base, good, bad, ugly, but that base was there and that came in handy. Do you think we responded almost spontaneously to the challenge, all the governments and the NGOs and so on, with digital aids? But do we not need to sustain this a little better, make it stronger, so that there's more thought behind it rather than a knee-jerk reaction of what we need to do? Your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. And first, I'd like to point out two heroes in this story. First is, I'm so happy that you started this session by congratulating all the people in Pratham, the employees of Pratham, who made this happen not only this year in very troubled times, but also over the course of many years. And it is so often, especially in India, we forget the employees and the effort it takes to produce a spectacular report like this one, like the previous ones that you do. So that's the first hero I would like to congratulate from my side also. I think the second hero which stood out for me were the teachers. Not only did I observe through our own program in 6 states, but also in the survey, that the teachers have been in the forefront of not only the education challenge, but also simultaneously handling the COVID challenge. Most of the surveys were done by them, most of the schools, and the remoteness of people was handled by them. That's the second hero which is standing up in the survey. There are a few things I agree with what Ashish has said, what Rohini has said. And I'd like to add a few things which, Madhav, you have rightly pointed out. A few good news and a few concerns which I walk away from the survey with worry. The good news, one is that 36% mobile penetration has gone up to 62% in 1 year's time. So I would see that this going up to 80-90% next year. So the penetration of the mobile revolution, which has been accelerating, continues to accelerate despite COVID, which is a great news. So that's the first good news which I saw. The second good news is that the government cranked up their engine and reached 80% of the textbook to the schools. This is phenomenal. I mean, this is, and especially because the sample size of 52,000 households is not small, and this is across all the 30 states. This is phenomenal, and I think the government should be congratulated on that. 75% of the children say they are getting help. Again, as Rohini pointed out, that's phenomenal. However, where is the concern? And Madhav, you rightly pointed that out, that if 62% have access to mobile, but only 33% got some learning material, that means that the quality of learning material which we are throwing is not good. And there is where my concern is, and that goes to the fact that 67% of the people, they say they have access to WhatsApp, but they don't say they got any learning material. And I also agree, there is where I have a slight disagreement with Ashish, that WhatsApp may be a good attempt to try and reach the content to them, but I don't think when you do the ASER learning outcome survey, it will show a steep drop that the WhatsApp, which is any one-way communication of distributing content, doesn't result into learning. Learning is an engagement. There, I agree with Ashish. What he was saying is that we need to forward develop technology where we engage technology in a two-way process so that it replicates the classroom as much as possible, rather than feel happy of distributing textbooks or distributing content on WhatsApp or putting whatever we wish on new content. That's a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition to drive learning. And therefore, that is the reason I see 67% of them saw WhatsApp, but still believe that only 33% of them saw some kind of learning improvement, which is there. The data which surprised me, and I thought that should have been a little more, is the 20% coming from broadcast media, because the government put a lot of resources, Jharkhand put, Haryana put, UP put, in broadcasting this over Doordarshan, and that surprises me. That means there is some tweaking which needs to be done. Once again, it goes back to my idea that just broadcasting content, whether it is Doordarshan or through digital, is not going to result into learning outcome. Now, while all this data is pointing out to the right thing, there are 2 or 3 slices of data I like to see when I read the report. One, my concern is that the enrollment which you talked about, I think the girls' enrollment in school will dramatically drop. That is one trend I would see. I'd like to see when I see the report in detail, did that happen? I hope it did not. Number 2, private school to government school migration, you've already indicated that is happening in a lot of states. Number 3, I would see whether the urban school children are moving to rural school children. And that is my big worry. If urban school children enrolled in government schools in urban, where the infrastructure like Delhi or Bombay or Calcutta is much better, and if that population is migrating, at least the family is migrating, even if the father or the mother comes back and works in the city, and the children are migrating to Bihar or to Jharkhand or to Chhattisgarh, to those rural schools where the infrastructure and the education quality is not enough, that will have further negative impact on our learning outcomes. So I will be very interested when you slice and dice the data and when I see the report to see if that trend is happening. Overall, I would believe that you have put a spotlight on something which is very critical, and I congratulate all of you, including the leadership team at Pratham, that you are masters in putting a torchlight on data which we need to see. We need to now take this data and slice and dice it so that we can honestly look at this data and drive action so that the learning of these children improve. The attempt is there, the reach is there to a certain extent, but we should not lose focus on what ASER 19 pointed out, that the learning outcome in this country needs significant rebooting. So congratulations once again, and keep doing the good work you're doing.
You're on mute, Madhav.
Sorry. So we're going to run out of time. So what I have to do now is I'm going to allot 2 minutes per person to make final comments before you even got started. But Vineet, thank you for saying all those things. Let me assure you that it seems to me, and that's one of the good news is, so far, girls, boys, nobody's saying they're dropping out. We are saying that they are not enrolled in school. We'll have to wait till the schools actually reopen and see what happens, which is a very interesting thing. I was very happy to see that. The worry that was, by the thousands people, children will drop out of school, that doesn't seem to come through this survey. That's one part. Now, let me just say before I hand it over to you guys again, um, you know, continuous monitoring of this and what we've done as ASER once in a year or once in 2 years, I think needs a much bigger alliance. And I'm going to appeal to you guys. You are the leaders of education and philanthropy in this country. We are, by comparison, we are small. But I'm going to appeal to you that maybe we should all come together and think how we can create a much larger community-based, citizen-led monitoring mechanism of the status of education in India. That's something that we should do later. So feel free, 2 minutes each. And where shall we start? We started with Rohini earlier. Ashish, first turn. 2 minutes to you.
Yeah, Madhav. So I think, again, great work. And I agree with you that, I think what you've shown through this phone-based survey is that maybe going forward, we need a way of sort of some high-frequency monitoring on this. So one is we need a plan. I think we have a lot of data coming out of this, and we need to work with state governments. The whole ecosystem needs to come together to think about how can we do this better? Obviously, state governments did their best, NGOs did their best, but there's a lot of lessons learned. Some states have done it very well. Some NGOs have done some things amazingly well. I think let's put our attention to culling out these best practices, creating a plan. I think this data is very powerful. That look, at the end of the day, people are relying on the smartphone, and that they're not relying on passive media. I mean, frankly, I'm actually delighted that broadcast TV did not work, because all evidence shows that, frankly, broadcast TV is not going to lead to any improvement in learning. At least with the smartphone, there's the opportunity to create more gamified solutions, to have two-way engagement, etc. I would just say that if we can work towards a plan, if we can get more state governments on board, if we can think of a more structured home-based curriculum where parents are more involved and there's a link between the school, teachers, and parents, and it's happening on a regular basis and it becomes embedded into the system. If we can rethink teacher professional development, going forward, those seem like the two biggest opportunities. And of course, learning apps for children, beyond just watching videos and doing some questions and activities, more structured learning apps like Chimple and others to be developed, which I think can really take children to a pathway to really improve learning outcomes. So while I'm very despondent in terms of this year, I think there's a lot of important insights from this report. And I hope, as you said, we can come together to really make this happen over the next 3 years in a more organized manner.
Thank you. Vineet, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I already said what I wanted to say, and I 100% support with you that at least from Sampark Foundation point of view, I am committed to working with whoever it takes to try and improve the learning within these children. We are working with in 6 states. That's not good enough. I think we need to reach more children as fast as possible. We will also like to lend hands, and I'd like to offer to try and use this report to shine a torchlight on some of the states who may not be doing well by giving examples of the states who are doing well. And I also agree with Ashish that we need to also invest in a better digital experience for the children. Could be an app, could be whatever it is, and not be just happy in either broadcasting on Doordarshan or giving textbook or just doing content. We need to be more hungry. We need to be more unhappy. We need to be more dissatisfied to make the investments which are required, which could be adopted by the state governments to try and improve the lives of these children. So we are committed. We are happy to unite with whoever it is, because our children, a very large number of them, and you guys have pointed it out, need help and need help today.
Thank you. Rohini, your concluding thoughts. After you, we just go to launch. Ajay Piramal is waiting in the wings.
Thank you. So my 2 minutes, I would say, first of all, see, ASER is always from the beginning a portal into a national conversation, right? So, and it's not like you do one ASER and things just fall into place, right? It took so long for after the first ASER for people to understand, oh my God, there's a problem of learning outcomes and we need to do something about it. People went from opposition to acceptance to action. The same thing will happen now, that perhaps you can do many more things even though children are out of school. And I hear you all, there might be learning loss. I know ASER is going to do more surveys. Of course, there will be some learning loss. We have to come together as a society to stem that loss and strengthen the children for the next academic year. All that will happen. But in the meantime, let's focus on the opportunity that we have. Let's use this data to begin a robust conversation on blended learning, on using digital, on using the home, on using things out of school and in school together. We have to get that every last child, the last child who is left out, has to be included. I see this as a serious opportunity for inclusion. Samaj Bazaar Sarkar working together. Remember, this survey also shows something great, that teachers, of course, who have been at the forefront of everything, have also used this time to acquire new digital skills to themselves learn. Look at the Diksha number. There have been 640 million learning sessions on Diksha, and they are continuing to grow at a very rapid pace in the last 6 months. There has been 2 million teachers trained just using the Diksha platform of the government. There is content on that platform in 30 plus Indian languages. As I said, we need to develop the digital pedagogy. We need to come together better, but it's the start of a journey, and it can be a great journey to fulfill the goal, Pratham's mission. Every child in school and learning well, but every child in school and anywhere and learning well. Madhav, this is an opportunity. Congratulations to ASER for starting a very new and very, very important conversation. We will help as much as we can in any way we can. We have to get every child on the learning path.
Thank you, Rohini. Thank you, Ashish and Vineet, for joining and staying within the time limits that were imposed on us. Actually, would have loved to talk much more. Devyani, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much to the panelists. I'd like to now invite Mr. Piramal to officially launch the report, sir. If you could please.
Should I? Yeah. So, I'm delighted to be here today, and I was listening into the conversation which Vineet, Ashish, as well as Rohini were talking, and all three of you are really hard-nosed people who know the education space, but I'm really happy that you are happy with the work that is being done by Pratham. Right from the beginning, right from its inception, Pratham has been one place, one organization where there is so much of innovation. They look at the way new ways of approaching major issues. ASER was one such one. And as Rohini correctly said, it started with disbelief, then there was, it was thrashed and finally accepted into policy. When we see what's happened to the new education policy, the focus on learning levels, the focus on involving families in the learning, I think we can say that Pratham, with all modesty, has played a role in this. So first, let me congratulate Rukmini, Madhav, and the entire team of Pratham for all the work that you have done and all the innovation that you bring about. I mean, when COVID started, we were very worried in Pratham. Will our programs continue? Will we do ASER? But I can say with all the challenges that they have faced, they have been able to produce some amazing results. So congratulate you once again. Let's see how we can now move the findings from ASER into really making a change in the way we look at it. How can we have this mixed learning of traditional learning as well as digital? How can we, I saw one very interesting trend in the new ASER results, that more and more people are going towards public schools. I think that's a very important trend, because the amount of money that we are spending, the government is spending in public schools, I feel the private schools actually don't deliver that much or as much better. It's the fact that we can move students there is also a very interesting trend. And the third very interesting thing again is that we're finding that more and more families are taking part in it. If we can further build on all this, I think we will have a better future for learning. The point again is that our IP is open. We want to collaborate. We want to see that how to improve learning levels in the country cannot be done by one NGO, cannot be done by 10 NGOs. It's all of us together, and we would welcome your participation. And with this, I have really I feel really humbled to be in this organization and have great pleasure in launching the new ASER 2020 report.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much for joining us, for giving us your time. And we are indeed happy to have you with us on this very important ASER today. As Mr. Piramal said, the report is now officially launched, which you can find on our website. But till then, you can tell us where you are watching from on bit.ly/ASERForm. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you for joining us today. And we will now move on to the next item on today's agenda, which is our second panel discussion. I'd like to invite our panelists for the second panel discussion today. We have Rebecca Winthrop from the Brookings Institution. We have Halsey Rogers from the World Bank, Bhaskar Chakravarti from Tufts University, and the discussion on learnings from school closure, pointers for way forward, will be moderated by Pratham CEO, Dr. Rukmini Banerjee. So welcome everyone, welcome to the ASER release.
Thank you so much, Devyani, for holding us all to time and steering us through this day. Big welcome to Halsey, to Rebecca, and to Bhaskar. I know it's very early in the morning for you, and wonderful to have you with us. Before we actually get into our discussion, I know that there's a lot of people who are watching, and शुरू से हमारी बातें इंग्लिश में हो रही है, उसके लिए मैं थोड़ा माफी मांगूंगी. ऑफ कोर्स इस वाले सेशन में मुझे इंग्लिश बोलना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि ये तीनों जो लोग हैं ये काफी दूर से एग्जैक्टली फ्रॉम द अदर एंड ऑफ द वर्ल्ड बात कर रहे हैं. बट मैं सबसे वादा करती हूँ कि इसका एक हिंदी एंड अदर लैंग्वेजेस में सबटाइटलिंग होकर सबके पास जाएगा. I had to just address, there is a lot of people watching. I was watching on the live stream myself, well over 1,000 people. And, because most people may be speaking other languages, I just promised that we will have some of this in Hindi and in other languages as well. But coming to where we are right now, I thought maybe I'll start with Halsey. Halsey, you brought out, you and the World Bank brought out a report very early in the pandemic, almost I think in early May, about what you thought was going to be the shock and what the responses should be. Now, 6 months down the road, have you changed your mind about what you said there? Or do you think that the things that you put out in the report are still absolutely as valid as they were then?
Well, thank you, Rukmini. And first, let me join the first panel in really congratulating the ASER team. I mean, for the vision in creating ASER. It's just been a remarkable initiative. I mean, it would have been very powerful as a one-off, but it's so much more powerful because you've been doing it year after year. remarkable. The data gathering, the community engagement, it's had a major influence on our global thinking of what we've labeled the learning crisis. Really shaped the WDR, the World Development Report 2018 on learning. And thanks for continuing those contributions with this excellent new release. I think it really sheds light on a lot of what we laid out on that report back in May about the kinds of shocks we were concerned about. We argued that the school closures were one shock, the economic dislocation and shock was another one, and that we would be seeing these echo through the school systems around the world. The real concern was that children would be disengaged, that they wouldn't be able to get learning activities, they wouldn't have materials. We've estimated globally that there will be very large learning losses and also widening gaps by socioeconomic level. I mean, my colleagues have estimated that there'll be a drop worldwide across low and middle income countries in what we call learning adjusted years of schooling. So essentially, if you convert years of schooling into high quality years of schooling equivalents, that's going to drop by more than half a year from 7.9 to 7.3, which may not sound huge, but it's actually, that's really reversing years and years of progress. And then secondly, a rise in learning poverty. Learning poverty is what we call it when children reach the age of 10 without being able to read and comprehend a simple paragraph, obviously very influenced by the kind of work you've done with ASER. That was already 53% before the pandemics across the world, low and middle income countries, which is just shockingly high. We're estimating that that will rise to 63%. And why is that? That's because of the lack of ability of school systems to really provide services to children while schools are closed because of many of the problems that you laid out here. I will say, like other panelists, and we can get back to go deeper into this, there are some very encouraging findings in what you found, and actually some of that looks better than I would have expected, but also areas of real concern, particularly on the widening gaps that we're going to be seeing as a result. And we can get into that. But anyway, so thank you.
Rebecca, you have been talking about leapfrogging. You have a whole book on the idea of leapfrogging. And I think you, with some other colleagues, also brought out a very, very interesting paper later, I think sometime in September, where you're talking about what lies beyond all of this. Now, having heard what we've discovered in India, how does that fit in with what you're seeing around the world?
Yeah, thanks, Rukmini, for the question. And I just wanted to join Halsey and all the previous speakers to say a huge congrats. The global community waits for ASER every year. And you've had huge influence around the globe and influencing and working very selflessly with other partners and groups across Africa and Latin America and other places. And one of the things that I love the most about Pratham itself is your endless capacity to respond and innovate against whatever circumstances you're faced. I think that's sort of the secret to your success and undervalued in organizations. Makes for tracking KPIs to donor reports really frustrating, I'm sure, but it's actually what one needs to do to tackle the problem at hand. So that's just a way of saying congrats. And for what we heard before, and what your question was how does what the previous panel brought out resonate with what we were seeing around the globe? We did do, myself and colleagues at the Center for Universal Education at Brookings, and I co-authored specifically with my co-director of the center, Miliana Vegas, a piece called Beyond Reopening Schools, with this idea of, if there's going to be any silver lining out of the pandemic, we need to look for it now, because we have to have it in our sights, sort of medium to long-term vision. We've been extremely worried exactly around the issues that Halsey presented. The World Bank has been putting out some great estimates. We've collaborated on some of them that are very worrisome. So we framed it in this question of the pandemic is terrible in many, many ways. Widening inequality is obviously happening, and some of the big worries that Halsey mentioned. And that what are the opportunities? And we saw a couple. One is, again, what Rohini mentioned before, that you guys have been doing an amazing job at, and we used you as a bit of a case study, which is that what the pandemic has done around the world, in the US and my hometown of Washington, DC, to India and everywhere in between, has really, with the shutting of school doors, education allies outside of the four walls of the schools have emerged. And they've been enabled by technology. And there are many education allies. There's TV, there's radio, there's media, there's broadcast, there's health and well-being departments and organizations. But the one that I think will have the lasting impact, and it is a true silver lining, is engagement with parents and families and caregivers. And it's not to say, and I use the term education allies very specifically, I do not subscribe to the belief that parents will rise up and replace teachers, that an app or a technology will rise up and replace teachers. I actually, if anything, the pandemic has reflected for me something that the previous speaker mentioned, that actually public schools, or at least government mandated schooling, it matters to me not so much who delivers and implements the schooling, but a publicly mandated school that is free and kids are able to go to, is really at the spine of community development, is at the center. I think that's something we're thinking much more about, and that parents can be allies, families can be allies to great effect. And in some way, they've been an untapped resource that we haven't in many countries fully leveraged. And we have seen, much like you guys have seen in your experience in Pratham, that actually families responded. If you communicate to them in a way that is easy, has low barriers, you don't have to have special connectivity, any an app. They don't have to stop their day and log into something, but basic SMSs, basic phone calls. And that's happening in cities in the US. It's happening in places like Botswana that has a Pratham-inspired intervention. It's happening in Latin America. It's happening around the world. Parents are responding. Parents that schools and teachers thought for many years didn't care about education, weren't interested, didn't have the bandwidth, maybe they didn't have the literacy rates, the sophistication to engage. It's not true. They do, they've responded, they care. And I've heard many people we interviewed for this, we did a series of case studies for this piece. A lot of them referred to it as a myth buster moment for educators and school community, that they had these assumptions about what parents were capable of, and these sort of episodic passive ways of engaging parents. I think one of the silver linings is long-term, we should always engage parents this way. It should be active. It should be continuous and iterative. It should be inclusive. And I think there's a lot of evidence, especially coming out of the US, that shows that real parent and family engagement in kids learning at home really supports kids' outcomes. So this could be, a possible leapfrog strategy. Thanks, Rukmini.
Bhaskar, coming to you, you are very centrally interested in this whole idea of the digital divide. And I loved your statement about, is the digital divide, is technology a multiplier or a divider? Listening to what you've heard today, what do you think? Where are we at?
So thank you, Rukmini, for inviting me to this incredible event and the launch. And I know I come late in a long list of people congratulating you and Madhav and Willima and the entire ASER team for producing the study at a time when it is so needed. And of course, it's needed every year. But of course, this year is different, as we all can appreciate. So I appreciate the opportunity to both learn about it, hot off the presses, and also the opportunity to just comment on it as we see it roll off the presses. What I find striking about what the study is revealing, as far as the digital divide is concerned, is that the technology, which of course has not penetrated universally across India, but in this moment has become a lifesaver for so many. And lifesaver not only in the context of just connecting people and giving them access to some knowledge and other information resources, and potentially even a form of livelihood, but it is connecting people in terms of educating their children. And your study clearly sort of highlights that. It's remarkable that this may be the first time I've ever seen a study that says something positive about WhatsApp. I mean, so far, everything about WhatsApp has been negative, and it's great to see that the WhatsApp school is working in ways that are, quite remarkable. And as Rohini had mentioned before, this is a high point of what we are seeing in terms of the technology being a multiplier. It is connecting the schools with the children, but it's also connecting the schools with the context in which the children study. And that has to do with the parents, the siblings, and even the community. So it's wonderful to see technology playing that role. At the same time, one worries that the historical divisions, the historical inequities that exist across India translate into inequities in terms of digital access as well. And there are children who are in the middle-class families in urban India that have access to much better technological resources. And might this lockdown, restricted form of schooling widen those differences? Because the kids in better circumstances are getting a much better replica of a normal education than the children who have been the primary thrust of your study. And so one does worry about the differences in access, the differences in devices, the differences in just technological sophistication of the children, the schools, the communities, and the parents. And how might this period, how might 2020 and 2021 and 2022, we know this is not going to go away anytime soon. Could this actually end up widening the gap? And that is something I seriously worry about. Another issue that I do worry about is that so many of the families that you have studied have only one device, or maybe a few devices to be shared across many. And is it possible that some children are getting the lion's share of that one phone in the household? Is it the case that the male child is getting a better access to the female child? So these are the, some of the historical divisions that we had, is technology potentially contributing to it? So these are some further questions that would keep me up at night. I'm certainly looking forward to learning more as you dig in further with your analysis.
This directly connects to a question I was thinking about asking Halsey, that actually at this very minute, there is a report that Halsey has had a major hand in that is being released. And I'm so grateful to you for leaving your report and coming into our report, which actually looks at the evidence for a whole variety of educational interventions, particularly those which help children learn better. Clearly, this period of very active innovation is going to probably give us a lot more on how technology and what is the combination of technology and people. So if you had to put out, Halsey, the next research agenda, taking on from what Bhaskar just said, and imagine that the report that you are releasing today was to be done again 5 years from now. What are the kinds, and how will we know what works and what doesn't when technology is involved? Ideas, thoughts?
Thanks, Rumina. Thanks for mentioning that report, and thanks for serving on the panel that's issuing that report. And I encourage everybody to look at that after this. It's the new Smart Buys report of the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel that Rukmini is sitting on. And what we do there is identify what are the most effective interventions for improving learning in exactly the kinds of the settings we're talking about here. And really, some of them actually, let me just say, relate very well to what we're talking about. We're concerned about these widening gaps. Well, the evidence panel has identified teaching at the right level and associated interventions that the Pratham has really pioneered as being one of the most cost-effective ways to raise learning for all children. That's exactly the kind of intervention that we're going to need to use to respond to close these gaps once children come back to school in the school reopening phase. And as I think Rebecca and others have said, we can use that to really make the education system much stronger than it was even before the pandemic. If we can just use techniques like that and the others that the panel has identified in its report as most cost effective, it can make a huge difference. Now, what do we want to see going forward? I agree very much with what we've heard Rebecca said about technology and teachers, that technology is not going to substitute for teachers. I think some of the most exciting evidence will be the kinds of things we're seeing experiments with around the world now on how to really use technology to help teachers teach better. What we've heard from X-Step, for example, which we heard about earlier, and Diksha, and some of the interventions, some of the innovations that are coming out of India. The more we can evaluate those, really show how cost effective they are in improving the effectiveness of teachers, in improving abilities of parents to support their children. Because I agree in your findings, it's very interesting to see the amount of activity that is going on, but it's also quite concerning to see, for example, I noticed that the share of children with no materials and no learning activities is more than twice as large for the least educated households as the most educated household. So the question is, what kind of innovations can help those in the least educated households to make sure their children have these activities, that they're at the right level? So it's really important that we learn from all this explosion of innovation in this period, and that we encourage, and then we really help people to focus that innovation on these children who need it the most, who are being left behind the most. Thank you.
Rebecca, you are sitting in a center called the Center for Universal Education, right? And you have a view really of interesting things going on all around the world. You do case studies of different countries and so on. At this time when learning from each other is a really critical thing, what can be done for sharing good ideas, good practices, promising seeds from different places? A lot of things are in your reports, but I feel almost like this has been a period in which at least we in Pratham or in ASER feel that so much is happening that we are not able to learn fast enough. What would be your suggestions both to us as well as to many others who are listening? But how do we learn from the world?
It's a really good question, and I think one that everybody is struggling with. Before I answer that, Rukmini, can I just make a comment related to your last question that Halsey responded to? Because one of the things that everybody should look at, the Smart Buys report that's coming out, and one of the things that's exceptional about it is the cost effectiveness data. And it's one thing to know, I mean, I've been studying innovations for a long time, and very few of them have any costing data. And we certainly know that, just because it's innovative doesn't mean it's helpful or good. There's a lot of things that are new, whether it's a technology or an idea to a particular context that isn't helpful at all. And then there's a lot of cool stuff that's amazing that costs a lot. So I think that's really important. And I wanted to add, because at the same time that we released our Beyond Reopening paper that you talked about in September around the UN General Assembly meetings, we also released an EdTech playbook that was led by my colleagues, Miliana Vegas and Alejandro Gimeni and NYU, and Rick Hess, who was at another think tank. And they, on the EdTech piece, because we get lots of people coming to us, especially investors and funders, as well as governments, et cetera, saying, where do we put our money? What do we invest in? And we basically had, two pieces of advice. One is invest in the instructional core, which is exactly what Halsey was referring to, which is lots of evidence showing that big education, you can invest in innovations, but often they don't stick. They don't last over time unless they somehow change the relationship of the instructional core. And I'm making geometric shapes with my hands here. The instructional core, or OECD calls it the pedagogical core, talking about learning across the globe, which is basically the relationship between content, teachers or educators, learners, and we added parents in that. And if it changes those relationships, which is what Diksha does, for example, that, picking up what Rohini said, then it's likely to stick. Not positive, but likely. And they came up with that was one piece of advice. And then the second piece was, at least in sort of low and middle income countries, there seemed to be 4 big buckets. One was scaling up standardized instruction. That really has worked for technology to do that. Facilitating differentiated instruction. That is exactly the teaching at right level stuff, with or without technology. Expanding opportunities for practice and application outside the classroom walls. And then learner engagement and gamification and making it fun. So anyways, I thought that was another answer to your previous question. And on the question about how do we learn from each other and in this massive time of innovation, if anything, one thing that people can no longer say, which they were able to say, and we did say over and over and over before the pandemic, is that education systems cannot innovate.
Yes.
They obviously can. They have almost all of them, and innovation is at the center of systems now. So when push comes to shove, they can. And I would say that the best advice I would have is to employ, Halsey might have a different opinion, you might also have a different opinion, Rukmini, but don't rely just on the very rigorous long-term, highly controlled, randomized controlled trials, but really employ principles of improvement science, rapid cycle evaluation, learning. There's a great example of doing this out of Botswana with Young Love, which was a rigorous evaluation that pivoted, but did, every 4 weeks rapid cycle. And improvement science is really the tool we need at the moment to be able to see what people are doing, what's working, and then adapt and move. So it can both capture and feed, both capture for learnings and feed what's happening. We are doing a bunch of work on improvement science with a big initiative focused on real-time scaling of innovations, and not even necessarily innovations, just effective approaches, and have found that is been very, very helpful in helping people capture what's happening and then learn from it in real time. So that would be my pitch of where to lean in.
Bhaskar, as a good watcher and participant in TV programs, you are free to answer whatever you want, regardless of what you're asked. But my 2 bits, there's a big industry in India now that was there earlier, and I think it's going to get even bigger in investing in education technology. Some of the major players of this new education landscape were on the on different panels here as well. What would you say if you had to give kind of 3 points or some headlines to people who are going to invest or who are already investing in education technology, particularly for school children, at least in India? What do you think they should do?
Great question, Rukmini, and I could go off in a few different directions. I could even speak in Hindi, Bengali, and my broken Marathi to your earlier point that we're only speaking in English, but I'll just stick with English to keep this less disruptive. So here's one disturbing pattern that we picked up in our studies of how technology is serving people during the course of the pandemic, and where some of the contradictions arise, and that could provide a pathway for some of the innovations that the technology companies, the ed tech companies, and others who are kind of participating in the space might want to think about. So here is a contradiction. And let me use the United States as an example of a study that we have been doing over the course of the last several months, and the same applies to different parts of India. So if you think about the United States, imagine the 50 states of the US and color the states that are doing really poorly in managing COVID in red, okay? So these are the states that have done really poorly in keeping people socially distanced at home, potentially working productively at home, away from each other, and keeping the rate of contagion down. And the states that haven't done a good job, you mark them in red. Now, these states that have been marked in red are also the states that the public health authorities say should not open their schools. Okay, so these are states where children have to be educated online or on phones or laptops. Now ask the question, which are the states that have the poorest levels of digital connectivity to enable online schooling, and mark those states in red? It turns out that the first list, the states that have done very poorly in managing the spread of the virus, are also very poor in terms of digital access, and therefore the quality of education that children are getting online in large parts of the state are poor. Now, I imagine this contradiction that you have to keep children at home and keep them studying from home, and the quality of internet access being poor is correlated, not just in the United States. It's true in different parts of the world, and it will be true in different parts of India. So when I think about what are some of the innovations that are needed in the next year, 2 years, even 3 years, we have to come up with ways in which we can enable ready access to parts of the country that are going to be behind in being able to work their way out of the pandemic, and therefore be able to give them lessons that work long distance, some kind of a hybrid form of education that allows the teacher to work with students, a few students who might be in front of them and other students who are on a screen, and being able to enable group exercises that create an inclusive community where those who are face-to-face can work with those who are distant. These are some of the challenges that we have to confront in the next 2 to 3 years, because this is going to be part of our reality. So a lot of innovation and creativity will have to be worked on, not just by the tech companies or by the platforms, but by the school systems and the parents and communities, and frankly, organizations like Pratham.
So we could keep talking. I mean, this is such a exciting topic, and all of you who have so much to contribute, but I'm mindful of time, and we should start winding up. Lots and lots of young people are listening. Just concluding thoughts, if you had to give advice to people like people in Pratham or many others who are very deeply engaged in working with children, even in these bad times, give us sort of parting 2 or 3 things. And Bhaskar, since you're right in front of me on the screen, why don't you start?
Well, I think my concluding thought here is that we have obviously, this crisis has been a catastrophe, a humanitarian catastrophe, an economic catastrophe, a health catastrophe, but this could also create an opportunity for us to learn how to learn. And that learning environment is possibly going to shift from the school being the primary focus of learning to a more dispersed, more holistic form of learning that engages and involves the parents, the communities, the siblings. And we have been forced into this situation, and perhaps some combination of in real life and digital will become the modality in which children will learn. And that's a good thing. We don't want the children to be learning the way they are right now, but the practice that we are getting by forcing ourselves to learn on WhatsApp and then engaging children and working with the teachers. This is a habit that will last as we go beyond the pandemic, and it'll be helpful for education systems all over.
Halsey, your thoughts?
Sure, thank you. I would just say keep innovating and learning from those innovations, both in a kind of long-term way, as Rebecca said, but also in an agile, nimble way. Make sure we're incorporating lessons into what we're doing. I mean, if I can take a step back here at the end, it's been really exciting to see this shift in thinking in India that Rohini talked about, which I've been able to see while tracking this country with great interest over the past 20 years. I think since reading the Probe report, which really had a major influence on my thinking about education and the problems here. And from afar, and sometimes on visits to India, I've been able to see this explosion of innovation in India that's really influencing countries around the world and influence, as I said, very much the findings of this other report that's coming out today. And now I see that innovation is in the context of a society that's really committed now to ensuring that all children learn, thanks to, in substantial measure, to Pratham. And I see this national education policy that's clearly setting out the goal of foundational learning for all children, as you said. And I really believe that with innovation, with engagement with each other, guided by this clear-eyed view of the learning landscape, anything is possible. Thank you.
Thanks. Rebecca, last but not least.
All right. Well, I would echo everything that my colleagues just said. But I guess if I were talking to maybe some of your staff members in Pratham who are young people who are inspired to help kids learn, are in the field, are doing the day-to-day hard work and making a huge difference, I would say don't waste this moment. One of the things that I'm quite worried about is that COVID in education transformation terms just becomes a blip. We have colleagues in China that's coming sort of out of everything COVID and saying their sort of word on the ground, maybe it's not true, this is just conversations with colleagues, but that there's a lot of just going back to normal, going exactly back to the way it was. And I think that young people are probably the best place to figure out how to do things better out of COVID. And I would say stay relentless, get practical, and push. So, for example, Himachal Pradesh is now doing I think we mentioned Himachal Pradesh before, electronic parent-teacher meetings, and they'll probably continue. We're working with them as part of our family engagement and education network with jurisdictions around the world with research. And, the question I always have is like, why did it take a pandemic for you to switch to doing electronic parent-teacher meetings when you got way more access? And I think young people in the field every day have spot ways to do things better. So I would say stay with it, be vocal, don't waste the moment, get practical, and email your CEO. Which I'm sure they already do.
No, it's wonderful actually. I've been getting photographs on my WhatsApp of people, thanks to Zoom and thanks to live streaming. Usually the ASER reports happen far away, but here many people who've been involved in listening, I think hundreds of phone calls, listening to parents, are able to also tune in and hear all of you, give so much value to the hard work that is happening. So a very, very big thank you to all three of you. I don't know if our previous panelists are listening. I'm very grateful to all of you for joining us. And, it's just very energizing to hear from people who are far away that what we are doing has a great deal of importance in helping everyone think what to do next. So over to you, Devyani. I hope I've done my job about keeping everybody on time. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rukmini.
Thank you, Rukmini, and a big thank you to all of our panelists, all of our guests, our chairman for joining us today. It's really been amazing to see how many people we were able to bring together on this platform today. Thank you very much from all of us at ASER and Pratham for being with us today. And just a reminder, before you leave, please tell us where you're watching from. Go to bit.ly/ASER-form. Please tell us where you're watching from so that we are able to get a sense of how far and wide this virtual experience was able to spread. And of course, to access the report, you can visit the ASER Center website. The ASER 2020 Wave 1 report is now live on our website. So you can visit asercenter.org to access the report, and of course share it widely, share it in your networks. All the films will be available on the ASER Center channel and also on our social media channels. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today, and look forward to seeing all of you very, very soon. Good night, good evening, have a good day, and see you soon.
Great job, Devyani.